Special Reports is a daily show that will cover issues surrounding the economic collapse. All our reports and daily alert news are backed up by source links. We work very hard to bring you the facts and we research everything before presenting the report. Subscribe for latest on financial crisis, oil price, global economic collapse, dollar collapse, gold, silver, Bitcoin, global reset, new world order, economic collapse, economic news, political, geopolitical news. Today, we talk about watching America collapse, the choice facing a declining United States. In the 1950s and 1960s, the United States was a vibrant society. Upward mobility was strong, and the middle class expanded. During the 1970s, the internal contradiction in Keynesian demand management resulted in stagflation. Reagan's supply-side economic policy cured that. With a sound economy under him, Reagan was able to pressure the Soviet government, which was unable to solve its economic problem, to negotiate the end of the Cold War. This happy development was not welcomed by powerful forces, both in the U.S. and Soviet Union. In the U.S., the powerful military/security complex was unhappy about losing the Soviet threat, under the auspices of which its budget and power had soared. Right-wing super-patriot conservatives accused Reagan of selling out America by trusting the Soviets. The American right wing portrayed President Reagan as the grade II movie actor dupe of cunning communists. In the Soviet government, Gorbachev faced a larger problem. With trust established between the two nuclear powers, Gorbachev released the Soviet hold on Eastern Europe. Hardline elements in the Soviet Communist Party saw too much change too rapidly, and concluded that Gorbachev has sold out the Soviet Union to Washington. This conclusion resulted in Gorbachev's arrest, and the consequence of his arrest was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. With communism departed, the Russians forgot all of Marx's lessons about capitalism, and naively concluded that we were all now friends. The Yeltsin government opened to American advice, and, by naively accepting American advice, Russia was looted and reduced to penury. Russia under Yeltsin became an American puppet state, and the Russian people paid for it with a great reduction in their living standard. The collapse of the Soviet Union is usually attributed to Reagan, and represented as one of his victories. This is a fabrication. I was in Reagan's government, both as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and afterward, as a member of a secret presidential committee with subpoena power over the CIA. Reagan told us many times that his purpose was not to win the Cold War, but to end it. He told everyone involved that all respect had to be shown to the Soviets, as the purpose was to end the threat of nuclear war, not to have an insulting triumph of victory. Unfortunately, the trust Reagan established with the Russians was betrayed by the corrupt and criminal Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama regimes. Because of these utterly corrupt regimes, today the distrust between the U.S. and Russia is far higher than ever existed during the long decades of the Cold War. What the criminal Clinton, Bush, and Obama regimes did was to resurrect the possibility of nuclear war that Reagan and Gorbachev had terminated. As I have explained at length and as all available evidence supports, the attack on Trump rests on an orchestration called Russiagate, for which no evidence exists. It is an orchestration concocted by John Brennan, James Comey, Clapper, Rod Rosenstein, Mueller, and the Democratic National Committee. The transparent lies on which Russiagate is based are repeated continually by the prostitute media, in an effort to create in the public mind a case for the removal of Trump from the Oval Office. Mueller is part of the plot against Trump, as is Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who appointed Mueller's special prosecutor. Both are guilty of sedition, as they are active participants in an organized coup to overthrow the President of the United States. But Trump is too powerless to have them arrested and put on trial for the conspiracy against democracy that they are conducting. President Trump is making a terminable mistake in trusting to facts and truth, neither of which is respected in the scant remains of Western civilization. Once there was hope that information available on the internet would serve as a countervailing power to the lies told by the Western print, TV, and NPR prostitutes. But this was a vain hope. There are some good and reliable websites, increasingly being closed down by the ruling elite. The ruling elites have most of the money and can finance most of the online voices, all of which are employed for the purpose of contradicting truth. I received today an email from Roots Action urging me to donate money to speed Trump's impeachment. The website has even prepared the articles of impeachment, and proclaims that Trump's fixer says the president engaged in a criminal conspiracy to sway the 2016 election. This accusation comes from one of Trump's former lawyers, Michael Cohen. They are allegations that most defense attorneys understand is Michael Cohen's effort to gain light sentence for his income tax evasion by composing, to use the term of Harvard law professor Al Dershowitz, evidence against the man Mueller really wants President Trump. I will be unequivocal. Roots Action, as is the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and the rest of the media whores, is lying. To pay off two women who might have been paid by the military/security complex, or Hillary and Bill Clinton, or the Democratic National Committee, to bring such charges, or who simply saw an opportunity to collect a bunch of dollars from Donald Trump, is most certainly, most definitely not, as Roots Action claims, the high crime and misdemeanor of attempting to fraudulently influence the outcome of a U.S. presidential election. This is an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Whoever advises Roots Action is a totally incompetent attorney. Moreover, to show the utter stupidity of Roots Action's ignorant assertion, a misdemeanor cannot be a high crime. A high crime is a felony. I have posted on my website statements from legal experts that there is nothing unlawful about paying off claimants. Corporations do it continually. It is much cheaper to pay off a false claim than to finance a court case to refute it. There is no reason whatsoever for a political candidate competing for a party's nomination for the presidency to be distracted by fighting court cases brought to extort money from him. Moreover, considering the dire straits in which the American population between the two coasts has been left by decades of jobs offshoring, the government's inability to provide assistance to those millions of Americans whose living standard is dissolving because the military/security complex appropriates $1,000 billion annually from America's resources, and the Trump public's awareness that provoking Russia into war is in no one's interest. Roots Action and the rest of the imbeciles have to be crazy beyond all belief to think that anyone who voted for Trump cared if he had sexual encounters with two women. Considering the dire straits of Americans, the last thing they would do is to vote against their champion because he had sex with two women, assuming that he did. Yet, an unsubstantiated claim by a lawyer who did not pay his income tax, a claim made for the purpose of a light sentence in exchange for providing false evidence against the President of the United States, is now, according to Roots Action, the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, CNN, MSNBC, etc., and so on, grounds for impeaching the President of the United States, who hopes to diffuse the extremely dangerous tensions between Washington and Russia. The military/security complex wants to impeach Trump because he wants peace with Russia, thus taking away the essential enemy that justifies their budget and power. Are Americans too stupid to notice that there is not a shred of evidence of the Russiagate accusations? What we have in their place is income tax evasion charges, not against Trump, but against an attorney and a Republican campaign manager. More convincing charges could be brought against Democrats, but have not. The Hillary crowd of criminals has proven immune to prosecution. No one has to approve of Trump in order to have the intelligence to see that Trump's intention to normalize relations with Russia is the world's main hope of continued existence. Once nuclear weapons go off, global warming will take on new meaning. After 3 8-year terms of U.S. presidents, relations between the U.S. and Russia stand at a far more dangerous level than ever existed during the Cold War. I know this for a fact, as I was directly involved in the Cold War. The security that insouciant Americans find in the belief that only the U.S. is a superpower is ignorant beyond all belief. A new book by Andrei Martyanov published by Clarity Press proves that, at best, the U.S. is a second-rate military power that can be utterly destroyed at will by Russia, along with the entirety of the stupid NATO countries, every one of which is militarily impotent. In the present correlation of forces, nothing whatsoever can be done to save a square inch of the Western world if Russia ever has enough of the absurd accusations, absurd threats, absurd postering of a totally inferior military power drunk on its own ignorant hubris. Americans are too insouciant to know it, but they are living day by day only at the mercy of Russia. The choice facing a declining United States America can't try to hold on to global hegemony as it slips from its grasp, or it can learn from Britain's mistakes. In Nairobi National Park, a succession of concrete piers rises over the heads of rhinos and giraffes, part of a $13.8 billion rail project that will link Kenya's capital with the Indian Ocean. It's a project with the ambition and scale of global leadership, and the site safety posters are in the language of its engineers and builders, Chinese. 400 miles further north, in one of Kenya's city-sized refugee camps, there is another sign of what global leadership used to look like: sacks of split peas, stamped USAID, a handful of young, quiet Americans working on idealistic development projects. I saw both this month, but one already looks like a relic of the past. The baton of global leadership is being passed from the US to China. In Africa, the evidence is everywhere. China will put nearly $90 billion into the continent this year. The United States nothing close. China is betting big on economic partnerships and dependencies along its new Silk Road, christened One Belt, One Road. The U.S., meanwhile, spends many of its dollars on expensive wars to the detriment of soft power projects like USAID or domestic welfare programs like Medicaid. America's global influence is certain to decline relatively in the years ahead. It is the inevitable consequence of the return of the Middle Kingdom. As that happens, the U.S. should be more deliberate about the policy choices it makes. It's a lesson I've seen my own country, which was once an empire, to learn the hard way. On the way down from global hegemony, Britain came around too slowly to investing in domestic welfare. The U.S. should apply those lessons sooner. The time is ripe. Its 45th presidents want to power on the backs of voters worn out by the burden of expensive wars, tired of wartime austerity, and fed up with rising inequality. America has spent nearly $6 trillion on sustaining long-running conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Median wages haven't gone up in decades. Its healthcare inequality is a byword in failure, infant mortality barely better than that of developing countries, and some states' death rates are soaring because of diseases of despair. It's clear that many voters gave up on the American empire. When they voted in 2016, they didn't care for the international institutions the U.S. had so carefully constructed after World War II, NATO, the United Nations, the World Bank. They didn't care for their country, to protect the liberal world order, to lead the free world. Voters on the left and the right showed their readiness for policy turn-innards. They wanted a country focused on domestic policies. These are my own views, and not those of my organization. A similar thing happened in Britain after World War II. In 1945, the Labour leader Clement Attlee campaigned on bettering the lives of Britons at the bottom. He promised welfare over warfare, a national health service, social security, public housing. It won him the election, scoring an upset win against the man who had just brought Britain its finest victory in a global war, Winston Churchill. But in the tumultuous years that followed, Attlee wasn't able or willing to fully scale down spending on the army and the empire. When Churchill came back after him in 1951, India and other colonies had already won their independence, but the overspending on foreign intervention and the military remained. The result was a delay of the inevitable decline of the empire, but also a half-baked welfare state, which couldn't provide for its citizens the promises that Attlee envisaged. During a series of international conflicts from the early 1950s to the early 1970s, Britain continued to lose not only territory in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, but also vast amounts of money and human capital, which could have otherwise been deployed to the betterment of its people. In Cyprus, Kenya, Oman, Yemen, the Suez Canal, the British possessions in Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, Britain spent vast amounts in a futile effort to retain some its imperial power. I don't long for the days of the British Empire. My family spent its vainglorious reign digging ironstone from the ground. The imperial sun never shone down the mine shafts of northeast England. But I know the end of the empire did not mean the end of Britain, or that of the well-being of its citizens. Quite the contrary, the Britain I grew up in provided me and my family with educational opportunities and health care we'd never have known had Britain not attempted to build a welfare state at home. Those of us on the global sidelines, America's anxious auxiliaries, know a collapse in the instruments of a nation's power when it happens. In Britain that collapse was precipitated by the left's loathing of imperialism. In the United States, it has come from the right's loathing of globalism. America remains a global power, but in the world's capitals, policymakers are now puzzling out which alliances and organizations will shape the future. Entropy rules over empire. President Trump posed in Churchill's armchair on a recent visit to Britain. A bust of Winston Churchill sits once more in the Oval Office. But in terms of America's position on the world stage, Trump's legacy may more resemble the one that Attlee set in motion. And Attlee is remembered and respected today not for an empire lost, but for a welfare state founded. Thanks for watching. Tell us what you think in the comments section below.